What's the good word, y'all? It's your boy DKB here. The preseason is finally wrapped up. The Jets finished 3-0. We come off a dominant performance defensively, at least against the Giants. But I wanted to take the time to get into our 2024 NFL draft class, right? We haven't really talked about the development for these guys. I think the assumption is definitely that a lot of these guys will make the roster, but I kind of wanted to recap everything that I've seen from these players so far, and then of course determine if we have a draft class roster lock, or if there are some guys that could be exposed to waiver wires by the time we reach our initial 53-man roster on Tuesday when final cuts are due. So without further ado, let's dive into our top pick, Olu Fashanu. Now, he's intriguing and interesting, right? Obviously, he brought all the accolades with him from college, not having a sack to his name. But I did have some concerns early in the offseason, right? Now, granted, the drills were meant to suit the defensive linemen. We didn't have shells or pads on at the time, so hearing like the likes of Eric Watts, undrafted free agents, and the sort be able to one-up and beat out Olu Fashanu in certain instances was a bit worrisome, but, as mentioned, take everything with a grain of salt, right? But with him, you had all of the outside noise about him potentially being a Pro Bowl caliber player out of the gate, potential all-pro caliber player. You even had some draft pundits that were mentioning that the moment Tyron Smith isn't made available on the field anymore, and I think nobody expects him to play a full season, is unrealistic just based on his history, that once the rookie sees the field, Olu Fashanu, in his first official start, whatever capacity that looks like, the job is officially his at that point. And maybe that does help out the Jets, and from a cap perspective, right, with Tyron Smith potentially not hitting whatever kind of performance and health-related incentives go into that. But nonetheless, that reality I don't think matches what we're currently at. With that said, I do think Olu is ahead of the curve when it comes to tackle play overall, right? You've already seen the development from being able to take Tyron Smith's tutelage, the phantom punch, as I would call it, among other things, right? The footwork improving, seeing him be able to really get in guys' shoulder pads. I think even from a run perspective, he's a little bit better than what he was in college already, although there's definitely a ton of work to do in both the pass and run blocking component. But I think mostly it still comes down to probably the biggest weakness many people called out during the draft cycle, which would be from a strength perspective. I think he has it in spades. Coming from Penn State, you're essentially going to have it if you're not already gifted with it. But being able to go out there and apply that to the field on a consistent basis, right? Outside of that, though, I think the guy has been phenomenal, right? He's already earned a pretty steadfast role on the team as the immediate backup to Tyron. He's been introduced to the right tackle spot and learning under Morgan Moses within the last 2.5 week span. So you've opened him up to that versatility, the flexibility that I think I would want out of my best sixth offensive lineman, right? And I'd say offensive lineman specifically because I don't want to just tie it into tackle. I think a lot of people forget that many people would have wanted to see him start regardless. And so the initial thought was, if Tyron Smith and Morgan Moses are healthy, and until one or the other, knock on wood, gets injured, have him have a serious competition with John Simpson as guard and thrust him into the NFL that way. And so I'm glad we didn't go that way, but all in all, I think Keith Carter has definitely got him on the quicker side of his developmental curve. And I wouldn't be surprised if you can see a Pro Bowl, caliber season out of him. He seems like he can go out there and take the experience and get it applied immediately, and I think that's about as much as you can ask for out of a rookie that's coming off a long college cycle and draft work, etc. And in a time where offensive line play has been on a downfall anyway. So I think it was unfair to a lot of Keith Carter's criticism last year. Injuries really did a number on the job he potentially could do. Now we can adequately figure out what we have, not only in our offensive line coach, but he has a stud to work with for the long term if this season works out. Olu Fashanu, definitely a roster lock, in my opinion. And I do think there's a possibility where when he does string together 2 or 3 starts, if that scenario occurs, he could take the job and end up running with it. Then we have our third round rookie, Malachi Corley. Now, he's a more interesting scenario, and I think just due to his draft slot and, of course, the wide receiver position being a little bit more open from a competition standpoint, he will also be a roster lock, right? You take a look at, he's lost some ability to develop, at least physically. Lost a portion of his offseason to injury, so OTAs came back during training camp, and I think he still missed maybe a week to 2.5 week span. But the Jets had a plan, right? This is one of the rare instances where, based on what I've seen from positional work, team drills, some of the alignments and stuff we've seen with him, the Jets have a plan to utilize his strengths right here, right now during this 2024 season and give him opportunities to show that he's improved some of his route running in areas that can benefit everybody long term. What do I mean by that? You can take a look at how he was utilized over the course of the offseason, trained in a running back room, has some design touches. You see him lined up in the backfield. And so they're really gearing him up, in my opinion, for a Deebo Samuel's light type role. And that was a lot of the comparisons he was getting during the draft cycle anyways. And whether it's, Deebo's a 1 of a 1 kind of guy. If we happen to have made that a 1 of 2, perfect. But if not, it's not necessarily about the Deebo Samuel comparisons so much so as you want to put him in situations where you can give him the same title in the NFL as Yak King, right? Coming out of the backfield, he'll be able to run with a head full of steam, automatically quick dump offs, runs to the flat, slant routes, all those kind of things. And he already seems like he has a very good awareness of the field, right? Again, the play continues to flash in my mind. Zach Kuntz getting that ball popped out from him, and the awareness of Corley to be able to grab that ball and, truck through a couple of guys in order to try to continue to turn that into a positive play. So I imagine he'll look very good in design touches. You've also seen him improve in some areas on his routes. Now it's a little bit tougher because a lot of these reports are coming from practice, but there have been instances of him winning on things like out routes, corner routes, etc. And he's doing this, keep in mind, that's like, let's say, a wide receiver 3, anywhere from 4 to 5 in many situations, which means he's going to be drawing matchups against the like of Stiggers, a JBC, some cases MC2, and I would imagine maybe potentially a DJ Reed when we get a little fancy and put him out there on the boundary, right? But all in all, I would say roster lock. We have a design plan to use him this season and implement his ability, his physicality out there on the field. And I don't think his impact will be significant from a stat line standpoint, but I can definitely say that I think he'll find a way to make a significant player to probably every game for us, whether that's just a crucial first down that we needed on a third down or so, or a big play that's really helped spur a scoring drive, something along those lines. It just kind of seems like he has that energy in him, but I'm really excited to see how we continue to build on his skill set as we get more comfortable with whatever he shows during the offseason. Braelon Allen. Now, he's probably the superstar of this group so far if Olu Fashanu isn't your top guy. I think this one pretty much goes without saying. Having our version of King Henry and pairing him with the guy that's coached King Henry for the majority of his career, right? Essentially everything up until him going to the Ravens. Now, Tony Dews. Now, there's a reason why I'm a little bit high on this coaching staff offensively so far for guys that do deserve some slack in certain elements, right? The Keith Carters. But looking at Tony Dews and seeing that guys are hitting the field running, I think just speaks volumes to we probably would have won either way. Between him and Deuce Staley when we were doing interviews, it seems like Tony Dews may have been the best guy to match us up with if the intended plan for us during the draft was to get a Braelon Allen caliber player. He's done everything that I feared he wouldn't be able to figure out in year one. He's playing to his size. I would argue, and I don't think this is too strong, that he may be already showing starter level traits and ability to go. Now, I'm not saying he's a workhorse back right out the gate or anything, but he may be able to, if he was our starter, go out there and handle 15 to 20 reps, whether that's pass blocking, receiving, running, and looks solid doing it, right? Maybe not 1,000-yard season, but maybe he's an 800-plus caliber guy with double-digit touchdowns or something along those lines. But you see the explosion. You see the ability for him to force the second and third guy to have to close in immediately because he's popping the first dude and he's trying to shake him off his leg, right? Running through all kinds of shoulder, arm tackles and everything. I absolutely love it. And so the Jets, we couldn't have done any better than finding a guy like Braelon Allen and immediately being able to turn a lot of his potential weaknesses into strengths right out of the gate. And, you know, I mentioned this when I talked to Dom C about our defensive, undrafted free agents. You can make the same argument with Braelon Allen, where really he was probably a couple rounds ahead of where he was drafted. A lot of people took the final season he had in Wisconsin with the coaching staff change and everything and made that the dominant conversation. And the two spectacular seasons he had prior to that went to the wayside. So at this point, with him leading, I'm not sure if he still holds this title, but at least being near the top tier of having the most explosive runs in the NFL during the course of preseason games, I think that's just a snapshot into what we are expecting to see as one hell of a highlight reel for him once he gets into these regular season games. So I love it. Feels like he's automatically tied into RB2. I thought it was going to be more of a competition than it was. But I am glad to see that he hits the ground running with a lot of thunder behind him. It's going to be fun. Then we get into Jordan Travis. Now, he's probably the most interesting case study here because we never got to see him this offseason. Now, listening to some of the thoughts from Robert Saleh and, just the general position coaches, etc., that would have come out and spoken to this in whatever degree, it sounds like some people would have expected that if this was the worst case scenario, they were ready for it. Some people maybe thought he could show something and get out there on the field at some point. Never happened. Ultimately, Robert Saleh had already quoted that they had long-term designs for him, and this was never really going to be anything other than a redshirt year. He feels like he could be QB3 regardless, but we have no idea what this injury timetable looks like for him to hit the field and actually participate in team drills. So it feels like it would be risky to have him on there, but then now that means, are the Jets going to go against the grain and have four quarterbacks for the first time in, I want to say at least 6 years or so, right? Jordan Travis will still be a redshirt QB4 in this case, and then you're probably looking at keeping a guy like Adrian Martinez, who I think did a phenomenal job this offseason, as your QB3, your emergency guy. But I don't think you want to expose either one of those two to waivers just because there's not a single quarterback in that room right now that doesn't have some kind of fearful injury history tied to him, right? So I'm intrigued to see how this plays out. If they do expose him to waivers, I would imagine somebody else is going to pick him up, right? And it's going to be essentially the same thought process. We'll give him the redshirt year. We are comfortable with the college tape, and we'll figure out what we have as we can actually get him out there on practice. I don't think we can get away with tagging him with I forget how this mentioned. We've had some comments in the chats from some of you guys that mentioned he'll go on IR, and then I think he can come off at any point before week 6 or week 8, something like that. If that works, perfect. If not, though, I would definitely imagine him to make this roster. So I won't say he's a roster lock, but in the normal way that I'm thinking about it. But I do expect him to end up on this 53-man roster one way or another. Isaiah Davis, this was my guy. And it's interesting because I thought he would be everything I'm seeing out of Braelon Allen right now. And that's not to say he isn't. Braelon Allen is just taking it to a different level. But one of the things I find really intriguing about Isaiah Davis is that he's still just as advertised, hard runner, nose down. He's looking to hit that hole and just crank out whatever the defense is willing to give and then take a little bit more as necessary, right? Pass blocking is a huge plus, which was a question mark for both of the young running backs. So realistically, you're just wondering if he can adapt to the speed and aggressiveness of the NFL as opposed to anything he's really lacking. But I think the plan, as they seen how good the hands were this offseason, is that they're looking at Isaiah Davis as their new Ty Johnson. And Ty Johnson was a very underrated guy that we didn't really appreciate a ton of. And it's a different, they bring different traits, right? Ty Johnson really had a strong speed element to him. But for a team that wants to get a lot more physical, and Isaiah Davis still has some burst that surprises people, not even 2 weeks or so ago, I highlighted him being able to run away from Jamie and Sherwood after catching a short pass and turning it into a long play. He'll catch some guys by surprise, right? So I'm loving it. And if he does follow that role, then he's pretty much locked in as RB3. And we may only decide to keep 3 running backs this offseason, especially with there not really being too many concerns at all. If not, you still have a pretty interesting stable of guys like Izzy that can hit practice squad again, and Valladay, who I expect to revert to practice squad as well. My favorite guy, just because I'm a DB person, Qwan'tez Stiggers. I think he's lived up to everything that I expected to be right now. The question, and one of the most intriguing things that Robert Saleh put out there, was that they already know they have a guy at cornerback. They want to know if they have a starter. I would say based on preseason, and I've been hyping him up so much this may come as a surprise. I won't say he's necessarily starter ready, and I've been the one that's put out there that maybe the Jets would think of him and JBC together as being a duo that can replace a DJ Reed or MC2, depending on which way they're leaning. And I still think that to be the case, but maybe a year down the line, right? Still, with Stiggers, I think he shows all the athleticism on tape. I think he still is able to touch every blade of grass with quickness to get to where he wants to go. I think the biggest piece is he really just needs the experience, right? He hasn't been exposed to these type of coverages before. He hasn't had to work from a communication standpoint the same way that he had to in the CFL as he's doing right now. And so you're seeing the developmental improvements, at least I have been able to, preseason to preseason, beginning of OTAs all the way up to our ending now, when it comes to things like pursuit, angles, how he's actually playing certain matchups. I can see him recognizing certain route combinations and being able to figure out the right spot to be in. And we've seen him make the plays, right? Interceptions over the course of training camp. He's picked up tackles for losses. He looks like a guy that can be a consistent playmaker in the Ashton Davis mode, right? Right place, right time. I think he has the mental fortitude, though, to be able to piece everything together and really be a complete player, though, long term. So I think he is a roster lock, in my opinion. I think you're looking at him as CB5 right now. I would probably put him behind... I will put him behind Brandon Echols and give Echols his due respect based on what we've seen from him the last 3 years. But I wouldn't be surprised if he does get traded or something along those lines, and they give those additional reps to Stiggers, to a JBC, which keep in mind is about 160-ish or so. But in my opinion, Qwan'tez is a roster lock, if nothing more so than for his draft position, if it comes down to him and a guy like JBC, who I think probably has performed better than Stiggers as a whole, but he has the more recent draft pedigree, right? And then Jaylen Key, Mr. Irrelevant for us. He has had an interception, multiple pass breakups over the course of training camp. I can't comment as much as I really want to on him because I haven't seen a whole ton and I haven't been able to really dive into all 22 from the preseason games. I know he got a ton of reps during the Panthers game, probably got a ton during this Giants game as well to make a last-ditch effort. But it seems like he's on the outside looking in, right? If there was one guy I would truly say isn't a roster lock, clearly it's going to be Jaylen Key, just because we have some more definitive players ahead of him, and the competition around him, right? You can still argue if you want to do the roster gymnastics, JBC can technically be labeled as a safety while he still hones in on his cornerback position, a bunch of other ideas that can be floated out there, right? But ultimately, one of the few things that I did capture is the fact that while he does rack up a ton of tackles, while it does seem like he's generally in and around the play if there's one to be made in his vicinity, he always seems to be playing catch up. and not necessarily being proactive in getting to the point. So there's some eye discipline stuff there. I still think there's maybe some pursuit issues when it comes to the level of depth he has to attack from, whether he's going from 15 yards, 20, 30, etc., and having to come up, whether in relation to being around the line of scrimmage. But overall, I think everybody has done very, very well, right? When you still talk about Jaylen Key at least being in the conversation for making the roster as a Mr. Irrelevant pick, I think that speaks quite well to the job that we've been able to do to get these guys prepped throughout this offseason and really, drill in on a lot of these fundamentals and things that can make these guys pop if there are opportunities out there on the field. So ultimately, let me know what you guys think. A little bit of a longer video than I was expecting, but let me know if you guys think I hit on these roster locks. If you guys have different opinions, of course, share them, and I'll catch you guys again. Peace.